So welcome back everyone from the breakouts, and I hope you were all able to grab something, some refreshments or drinks at least. I'm Pauline Simpson, Project Manager for the Ocean Best Practices System. The short 45-minute session that we're having now is to offer the work groups the opportunity to actually share some of their initial discussions and possibly some plans for next week that they talked about during their breakup session. Just a few housekeeping, as always. What I'll do is I'll call each breakout reporter in the order of the agenda. So we start with convergence and we'll end with omics. Each presenter can unmute themselves, and if there is a template available, Google template available, Ben will share it, but if you want to share it yourself, then let Ben know, please, that you will do that. Each work group has 3 minutes, which isn't very long. I'm sorry to say an alarm will sound at 2 minutes 45 seconds, and hopefully then you'll be able to sort of close up by the 3-minute deadline. It's really all about ensuring that the people at the end of the list, the work groups at the end of the list, get an equal amount of time to share their thoughts. And again, as has happened throughout the day, because of the limited time, all questions please should be entered into the chat. And the next session, which will be a working group panel discussion moderated by Emma Heslop, and they will pick up those questions and discuss them. So if we can go on without any ado, convergence of methods and endorsement of best practices, and I believe Rebecca Zitun is presenting.
Yep. Ben, do you want to share the screen, or should I do it? Okay, cool. So we just had the hour discussions about convergence and endorsement. So we just talked about that we have so many methods and practices out there. And we are flooded with information and methods online and internet, that it's really important that we converge these methods to streamline our science, because when we streamline our science, we will have better quality science. And of course, the intercomparability of data will be better. And if we have better data, better quality, more data, then we can also inform policy better. And when we can inform policy better, then we can also actively contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals in the ocean decade, the decade of ocean science. And then of course, when we converge data, it's also important that people know about what data exists and which methods are best practices. So we also have to endorse data, and we have to figure out how do we endorse data, in which documents should be endorsed, and how do we go about this process. So, and especially under the umbrella of ocean best practices, like how can ocean best practices help different communities or institutions to actually get to that stage that we can converge and that we can endorse certain documents, which will of course then be used in the community. And then next slide. Yeah, that's just our program. So on Monday, we will think that we have a global approach. So we have certain speakers talking about global approaches, how GeoTraces and SCORE, for example, how they approach best practices. Then we will have an open discussion. Same goes for the other days, where we have a regional approach and an organizational approach. And on Thursday, we thought about having an open forum. So anyone, because we have quite a lot of members who will join us. So we will have an open forum so people can drop in, share their experiences, share their stories, because all of them are actively in the field and ocean observers. So it will be really good to learn about success stories and fails and challenges. And it will be really good to get a good idea of what the future steps of ocean best practices will be like. And then yeah, next slide. Really fast 3 minutes from my side. So yeah, we did a really nice picture of all the 20 or 22 people we had online. And so everyone introduced themselves. We had a bit of time, so we did it. It was really nice to get to know all the people. Most of them were Europeans, so which is obvious because it's Friday evening. That was nice. And we talked a wee bit about some issues, because we had a couple of people joining from Asia, and the people from Asia have troubles, especially China, to access Google Drive. So they can't actually access the documents and the presentations we have. Yeah, and then we talked about that it's really good that we are all practical scientists. We are all in the field, and so it will be really good to have productive discussions, fruitful discussions in later on. Yeah, and we talked about the focal points, but yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was excellent. I'm moving on because we have to move on in this short time. Our next one is the working group on developing training and guidance materials, as well as mechanism for the submission to OBPS and use of OBPS practices. Johanna, are you available?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Pauline. So Ben, I'm gonna use the PowerPoint. Yes, please. Okay, thank you. So for our working group on developing training and guidance materials, we talk about the scope of our working group, and that is actually, next slide, please. Am I supposed to? Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. So this breakout group will discuss the methodology to provide training in the development and documenting of best practices, their submission to the OBPS, and identify any challenges and potential pitfalls. Our aim is to contribute to the OBPS community by coming up with some recommendations on how to ensure the use of OBPS as an evolving system which fosters collaboration, consensus building, and innovation by providing coordinated and global access to best practices and standards. Next slide. So we gave an overview of the sessions that we are going to have next week to accommodate global participation. There will be 2 sessions on Monday and Tuesday. On Monday, it's going to be 1400 UTC, and on Tuesday, we are aiming to have a convenient time for the participants from Asia and Australia. So that's going to be 0200 UTC, and on Wednesday, we are going to have a session to synthesize our discussions and to come up with a summary of all the inputs from the participants. Next slide, please. So for the points of discussion, we came up with questions that would guide us through in the discussion next week. The first question is to explore whether there are existing training programs related to ocean best practices that our participants are engaged with or are aware of. And the second question is to explore who could be the target users of OBPS training. And we also want to generate insights on what CD methodologies, what capacity development methodologies can promote the wider use of OBPS. And when we mean capacity development methodologies, these are whether it's in online courses or face-to-face training, or like some other programs that other organizations have, or like summer school, internship, traineeship programs, etc. And then the fourth question would focus on the existing tools, resources, or platforms that can be utilized for training on the development and dissemination of ocean practices. So we would like to know if there are existing toolkits, manuals, handbooks, videos, or portals that are where that our participants are aware of or they're using in their respective organization. I think that for this specific question for next week, we're going to have a brief presentation from our colleague in the Ocean Teacher Global Academy, which is one of the platforms that we can use for the training. And the fifth one is to explore on the best practices in e-learning. This refers to online courses, webinars, MOOCs, and how can they contribute to the effectiveness and success of OBPS training. And well, for the sixth question, like earlier in the plenary, we have a very powerful perspective from one of our colleagues from the indigenous communities. And these questions somehow explores that point as well on how we can engage non-scientific communities and practitioners in the creation, adoption, and routine employment of best practices. And for the last questions, we'd like to explore any potential challenges and pitfalls in the process. And so these are the questions that would hopefully guide us through the breakout discussion next week. So for the last slide, We asked our participants, and perhaps for all of us here in attending the OBPS workshop, to share your preliminary thoughts or insights on those questions that we shared, so we can identify the key points that we should focus on in the discussion next week. We prepared an online form with these questions, and your insights would be very, very much useful for us to facilitate the discussion. So please visit the online form. You can find it at the surveymonkey.com/r ZXD7HRS. We would appreciate any of your inputs on informing the discussion for next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanna. Are you going to put that SurveyMonkey URL in the chat so that people can
Oh, yes.
access?
Yes, it does. Yes.
All right, thank you so much. And a reminder to everyone to put their questions in the chat so that they can be discussed in the next session. So the next working group is Data and Information Management towards globally scalable interoperability. Pierluigi, are you available? Yeah.
Yeah, I am. So my screen is up. Can you see it?
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Let me just move that to full screen. Good. Indeed, so let's move on, 3 minutes. We asked 3 challenge questions to our participants, and it's again very dynamic. Our whole session for the next week it's going to be like that. We'll have short 1-hour challenges with lots of different perspectives, because the culture of data and information management is wildly different around the world. So we need a kind of creative space, somewhat unstructured, which will all feed into our working group report to advise the Ocean Best Practice System. So the first question we asked, where do we keep our digital methods, our data and information? And the usual things came up, so our code is on GitHub or GitLab. We have wikis. There are also physical notebooks and digital notebooks. It's all over the place. And there are places where people want to keep things, but they're not there yet, because changing the culture of how we store digital methods, data information methods, it's new to many people. It's a real change that's going to happen over the next decade. So it's all over the place. So that scared me a little bit, but it's expected to a certain degree. But then it gets even more terrifying as we go into saying, how do we link all of this stuff, this exciting data and information stuff, to our methodological documents, our standards, our best practices, etc. And there are all of these very fascinating technologies, which in our group, we know of, we've heard of, we're excited about, but it sounds like completely alien language to people who are not within our little culture of data and information management at a high level. So that's a problem. And that's something that the OBPS will need to bridge in the future. How do we connect that subculture, or what is now a subculture of data and information management, of people who are implementing it, with everyone who wants it? And that's everybody. Everybody wants it, from policy level to individual people in the public who want to know more about their coastlines and their resources. We need to bridge that. And the OBPS, I think, is in the middle of that. So that's going to be a challenge that we're going to explore through our themes during the next week. And different kinds of data types, you see at the bottom, are presenting completely different challenges. So this is a massive sort of thing that we need to think about. And within the context of UNESCO, the Science, Education, and Cultural Organization, that's a fascinating mix, because there is a plethora of cultures linked to data and information. Then even more terrifying, that blew my mind. I mean, I often think that I'm, on the edge of sci-fi most of the time, but this group is fantastic because there are new challenges that came in. What are the game changers? Looking ahead at the next decade, where are we going to go? What's going to challenge us the most? And it's so much. I mean, you can see it goes right off the screen, and I'm not going to try to summarize that, but I would highlight things that we need to educate people. We need to change the level of digital literacy. And we also have to incorporate different ways of knowing, different ways of understanding data, information, and knowledge that are not commonly represented. We need to bring that in. So there's a lot of challenges over the next week that we'll address. Our sessions will be somewhat more brainstorming, unstructured, and Jem, my early career co-lead, and myself will rally that into our consultative document for the OBPS to see how we can help, at least on the methodological level, to make this a more tractable problem for the next 2 to 3 years in our development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierluigi. That was a lot to get into that short time, so thank you very much indeed. The next one is ethics and best practices for ocean observing and applications. Now, Michelle, are you online? Michelle, unfortunately, is suffering from COVID, so it's possible she may not be available. Michelle, are you there?
I'm here. No, I'm here.
Well done. How are you feeling?
But Fred, I will share my slides, and Fred Worsley will better explain because of my English. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay.
Very good. You want to do it yourself? She's chickened out. Okay, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So, you want to get your first slide up there?
Yes, I'm trying to go back.
So to quickly start what we were discussing, we were a little bit nervous, similar to Pierluigi, about being in this ethics session because we weren't sure we were not sure that there was a community sense that it was a need for ethics and best practices, and a small but powerful group of people made it abundantly clear that we have all sorts of ethical issues looming for us, and that it's something that we are going to need to deal with in the near future. So next slide, please. By definition, ethics is the reasoned reflection for a set of actions based on technological advances. And in the oceanographic context, a lot of reasons, a lot of actions we need to undertake to deal with this. In terms of our group, we're going to be dealing with 4 particular sessions that are going to first touch on an overview. Michelle, which is your next slide? Yes. Overview on existing ethics in ocean observation, where the field stands right now and where we think it ought to be changing. Second day, exciting session going to be led by Shelley Denny-Amigma from Canada, who's going to be discussing ethics with regards to ocean observing and evolving ethical issues for Native peoples, Indigenous peoples here in Canada. Third day is going to be led by Mackenzie Mazur on ethics and fisheries management. And on the fourth, we're going to take a dive into, are there ethical issues in the fact that we are not effectively optimizing our use of existing ocean infrastructures? And what do we need to do to correct those particular issues? Next slide, please. In terms of the discussions that we managed over the last 40 minutes, a number of different things emerged, many different problems surrounding things like access to samples. Is it ethical to use samples that have been collected in what would be perceived to be now unethical ways, currently stockpiled in museums, but can tell us a lot about what's happened in the past surrounding our ocean world and how things have changed. We're looking at the disconnection between local communities and the scales of interaction. So for example, if you begin to involve fishermen in discussions, are we actually setting up a conflict of interest problem where they are the ones who are standing to benefit directly from decisions that they're now beginning to influence in those kinds of ways? And looking at existing best practices and existing regulations, is that good enough? If we have a regulation that says that this is legal, does that make it ethically acceptable? One of the examples that came out of the discussion was the fact that as you do animal experimentation permits, they are required, for example, for fish, but they're not required for lobsters because it's the difference between vertebrates and invertebrates. And is that an ethically defensible line? Next slide. Second question that was asked to everybody was, are you aware of any disagreement with existing ethical recommendations? And if so, do you know why? What came out was a lot of these particular examples. We will be exploring these more in the upcoming 4 sessions that we'll be running next week. Next slide.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. So that's it. Basically, we're on a roll. It's clear that we're going to have a lot to talk about. Thank you very much. Sorry about this discoordinate. Michelle added 2 slides that she didn't tell me about except on the private chat as we put this up. So I was not prepared for these.
You did a great job. Don't worry.
This online working is giving us new skills, isn't it? Indeed. Okay, thank you so much, Michelle and Frederick. That was wonderful. The next one is ocean uncertainty quantification. I'm assuming it's Mark?
Yes.
Mark? Yeah, good.
Give me a sec here to figure out what I got to share. Sorry.
I think I've got the template for you. I'm not, did you use the template? No, it's not completed. So you have your own thing.
It is in there.
It's in your folder.
Yeah.
Report one breakout. Wait, maybe I got it here. Hold on.
I think that's it. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is quite long, so good luck.
I think there's 6 slides.
Well, we'll see. Tell me 1 second.
It'll go fast.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Yeah. Next slide. Just our goals are listed on this slide and the next slide. I won't dwell on each one of them. This is a consolidated listing. Kimberly narrowed it down a bit with 5 co-leads. You can imagine that we all had lots of different thoughts for what should come out of this. Next slide. Just a few more. They're just there for the record. Next slide. So this past hour, we heard from 2 speakers. Shane Elipot explained why there's a need for ocean uncertainty quantification, and U.S. CLIVAR has funded a Ocean UQ working group, and the second speaker was Stefan Seitz. He's from the National Standards Institute in Germany, and he spoke about metrology and how it can be applied to some ocean observations. Next slide. And so the first thought we had was that the ocean uncertainty quantification community spans the same workspace as the ocean best practice system. It's the full value chain across the broad variety of variables and products. And so we have that in common. And then we also have in common that ocean uncertainty quantification is undervalued, as are presently undervalued. The need is now recognized for ocean best practice, sharing ocean best practices. And so these are just a few thoughts that the ocean best practice is already doing a lot that can help ocean uncertainty community. The tools are there to help us with promote ocean UQ and harmonize techniques. And we're considering that the training that both groups are talking about doing in 2 or 3 years from now would be a great example of leveraging our efforts. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. That was under 3 minutes. Well done. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to the next one, Ocean Partnership Building, which I think Andrea McCurdy, you will be leading.
Yeah, I didn't create slides. We basically had a roundtable discussion that basically was the characteristic of this session. We began by really looking at trying to vet further this idea of, is a collaborative organization model a suitable model for developing partnerships across ocean observing. And there was a really nice white paper that came out of OBS 19 that went into this. It was by Weller et al. As well, the National Academy of Sciences and the Ocean Studies Board is wrapping up a 3-day workshop on this very topic. And so we're thinking that we're all at the beginning of talking about this model as something that can be used to build partnerships. And so just real quickly, within that model, you look at things like having a common agenda, shared measurement systems, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communications, and a backbone of support. So again, a very simple thing, but what we did is we convened and we went around the table and said, yes, partnerships are important. They're critical to our business as ocean observers, because we had folks who manage large observatories and programs, and we had folks who bring collaborative people together, and so talked about how partnerships are developed. And so in essence, it was agreed because they bring together better science, maybe even funding, expertise, you know, you can name it, it's there, resources, opportunity for advocacy, as well as capacity development. And so what we will do next is via the Google Docs, we're going to work mostly online because we are a highly distributed group, is look at these 5 elements and talk about how these have been used, either in conjunction or not, in successful partnerships, and talk about how that can be used as a potential best practice for the community. So it's just sort of a way to say this is a leg up. If you're going to do a partnership, these 5 things need to have been considered, you know, at a minimum. And then out of that, our young career professionals are going to try and build upon that a broader impact use case study on sustainable blue economies built on sustainable partnerships for ocean observing. So that's sort of the work we're about this week, and that session will be Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. So that's us.
Thank
and
you.
I'll get
Thanks.
the slides finished. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And again, please keep your questions coming into the chat. That will be wonderful. Right, the next one is fisheries. Peter Hogan, are you available? Or Cisco?
Yeah, this is Cisco.
Hello.
Peter was having some internet problems, so we didn't know if he was going to be able to do it or not. So I'll try to summarize real quick.
Thank you.
We had a good meeting. It was only attended by about 9 or 10 folks, probably time zones and such. But just a brief overview of how we plan to conduct the workshop next week. We decided that we would focus, you know, fisheries is a very broad topic, and so we focused on wild capture fisheries of various types, and leave topics such as aquaculture and such probably for some future consideration. We broke down, we're going to have meetings for 4 days. The first day we will be talking about data collection, and that's data collection in the broad sense, anything from ship-based surveys to novel methods and ecosystem considerations. Second day, once we have the data, what do we do? Well, we have to generate stock assessments, and there's various approaches to that. Some populations are data rich, some are data poor. And now we're having to get into ecosystem and socioeconomic aspects as well in terms of how we do the assessments. The third day, we will be talking about management advice. How do we translate those numbers into something that can be communicated by decision makers to communities. And then the fourth day, we will do a review summary of topics, including emerging issues for future consideration. Every day, we will have 2 sessions, so we try to cover all time zones. Today, the conversation was actually quite good. We immediately got into discussions about data sharing, novel methods, etc., that we hope to continue next week. So in the interest of time, I'll just say it was a quite successful first meeting today, and we're geared up to continuing next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isco. Moving on, just to keep us going, Sargassum is Emily. Emily, are you available?
Yes.
Good.
Available. Just pull up my slides.
1 sec for the screen sharing. Here we go.
Oh, okay, great.
All set, right?
Yes. So we had the Sargassum breakout session today. And during the session, we had 26 participants, and we had an introductory presentation by our early career co-chair, Shelly Ann Cox from the University of West Indies. And then Cesar Toro, who's the executive secretary of IOC UNESCO, Io Caribe, which is the IOC region for Caribbean and adjacent regions, gave an overview about the current status of sargassum activities. And then Leah Segui, who is a fellow working on the GeoBlue Planet initiative with us at NOAA, gave an overview of an activity that we have been working on to compile information for sargassum into a centralized place, the Sargassum Information Hub, and then how we are looking to use that effort to best crosswalk with the best practices. Next slide. For the discussion, there was a fair amount of discussion about how there is a lot of activity going on related to monitoring of sargassum, as well as forecasting, trying to develop new sciences and technologies related to sargassum monitoring, as well as mitigation and management of sargassum. And the sargassum community has been working together to collate some of this information, and we've started compiling some of the ocean best practices in the Ocean Best Practices system, specifically related to sargassum management. And so we're hoping to build on that during this week. Other items that came up is that there's a need to do capacity development with scientists in West Africa, as that is a region that also has impacts from sargassum. And we're hoping to engage more with scientists from West Africa this week. There also is a need to increase the sharing of observations of sargassum. And it was pointed out that this would also be helpful for past sightings if there were documentations of sargassum sightings in these regions prior to 2010, which is when a lot of the problematic issues became available. And we also discussed that since this is a basin-wide issue that is causing a lot of impacts on coastal communities, that it is going to be an important topic for the Decade on Ocean Science. And so we will be discussing how to engage properly with the Decade this week. The schedule that we are working on for the Sargassum Working Group is we have several days that are focused on different subtopics. So the first day on Monday, we will have a session where we're talking about developments of sciences and technology related to sargassum. And then we are encouraging people to attend a webinar, which is part of a webinar series that UN Environment is doing along with IOC and GAZAMP on sargassum. And so they're having one on the West Africa regional perspective on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we will be having a session on monitoring and forecasting of sargassum. And then on Thursday, the session will be focused on best practices for management of sargassum. And I think that's all we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. That's excellent. It's very obvious from all our presentations so far that we're all the work groups are going to have a very full week ahead of them next week. The next one then, please, is marine litter and plastics. Artur or Renee, one of you?
Also.
Yeah,
Thank you, Renee. Artur?
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so I'll report on behalf of the Marine Litter Working Group, which is being led by Renee Guerrero, two early career professionals, Ngozi Ogugwa and Florence Jovini-Peter, and myself. I want to acknowledge from the beginning that the intense and exciting, hopefully, schedule of sessions we have planned for next week would in fact not be possible without the contribution of 14 international experts on marine litter who agreed to take up the roles of leads and co-leads of individual sessions. And you can see their names in the team up calendar. We have used our initial breakout hour to introduce the goals, objectives, and the detailed agenda for the events of the coming week. Being aware of the critical need for standardized and harmonized observations of marine litter, the OBPS working group convenes with the goal to...
Artur,
yes?
Just a little, could you put your mic a little louder? It's quite soft.
Okay, how is that better?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. So we're really convening with the goal through community discussions on aspects of developing and implementing guidelines and best practices for coordinated collection, quality control, streaming, and management of marine litter data. So during our session, we also set the scene for the upcoming discussions on the needs for standardized monitoring and interoperability of research data. And these needs are underpinning the development of globally coordinated observing and information systems, the visions for which were described in recent community white papers, such as the Ocean Ops Community White Paper on an Integrated Marine Debris Observing System, IMDOS, or the white paper on a global platform for monitoring marine litter and informing action. So we also noted that this working group is not starting from scratch, but builds on many ongoing efforts by expert working groups and community events. To meet the goal, we have proposed a number of objectives, which the working group sessions will collectively address. I'm not going to go over them now, but you can look at them later if you like to. We also heard a perspective from our early career professionals. Florence Peter, working in Tanzania, and Ngozi Ogugwa from Nigeria. And this included their view on the benefits and impacts of best practices in their work with the local communities, for example. So that was very interesting. Having a broad organizing group of almost 20 dedicated persons resulted in a very diverse set of sessions that we've planned for next week. They reflect the fact that development of marine litter monitoring and assessment spans a number of areas related to setting requirements for what to observe and how, global coordination of observing approaches and methods, ranging from in situ to remote sensing to citizen science, but also last but not least, data management aspects. So during the short discussion, we managed to touch upon some ideas, which we will pick up on during the individual sessions planned for next week. For example, looking at existing and future new observing platforms, or getting expired by global biodiversity data solutions to adopt in marine litter possibly. So we really look forward to the outcomes of these sessions and also cross-checking with other working groups. And this will hopefully generate a collective impact on the marine litter community for best practices development, but also guide OBPS on how to support this process. So that's all from me, thanks.
Thank you, thank you, Artem.
The times are not in UTC, they are in European Central Time. I mean, Central European Time. Sorry.
Ah, good point. Thanks, Renee. Sorry about that.
Yes, that's a reminder. All of these sessions, of course, are on the Team Up calendar. And it is important when you're viewing the Team Up calendar to make sure it's displaying in your time zone, because it's very easy to get confused. So thanks for that reminder, Renee. That was a good one. Thank you. We're hitting up against time. So the next one is surface radiation. Megan, yes?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, okay. So I don't have any slides really, but just to go through what our session is going to be about. The goal of our session is we would like to extend the land-based baseline surface radiation network to be global over the oceans. After all, the oceans cover 70% of the Earth, and so the baseline surface radiation network should extend over the oceans. But there's a lot of challenges about measuring surface radiation over oceans. The platforms move. There's, right now, Christian Lancanelli, who runs the baseline, the BSRN, and who will be part of our session, was saying that the land-based stations, have to have a person who maintains them every day. And that's absolutely not feasible with the ocean stations. So not all of the best practices that apply to the land-based sensors will be appropriate for the oceanic measurements. But the best practices for the land-based measurements are much more well-developed. And so we hope that through this session, we're going to bring together the land-based measurements practitioners with the oceanic-based measurements. We'll start with the two land-based briefings, including Christian Lancanelli's presentation. And then we'll have about 8 briefings from different practitioners of ocean surface radiation measurements. And we'll go through how this is, what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they do it, the challenges and the best practices that they have. One questions that we had were, as we develop these consensus best practices, obviously we would write that up and submit that to the repository, but we would like to also write this as a peer-reviewed published paper. And so we were wondering, we see two choices. We think that the Frontiers in Marine Sciences journal would be the appropriate journal, but there's two research topics that might be appropriate. One is the best practices, if that's still open, or I have a research topic for surface fluxes that this would be appropriate for, and so we'd like some guidance on what, where to target that. The other question that came up was, this is maybe one of the smaller groups of this workshop, but it's still pretty large, actually. I think that we have more than 45 people registered for this session, and I've been getting lots of requests from people over the last week who would like to join the session, and so this is just a start, really, and we might need to have more time, and we also might want to have more people, and I'd like to know if those are possible.
Thank you, Megan. All done? Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things, because we've had registrations, I'm sure there are some of you on who actually registered 2 minutes perhaps before we actually started, and even 10 minutes in. So yes, I think we can accommodate more, but let's put it through the registration process just so that we've got the security aspect sorted out. So I'll talk to you separately about that, if that's okay. All right.
Okay.
Were you okay with that, Megan? Did you hear what I said? Yeah.
Yeah, I stopped my video because the audio was kind of garbled, but I believe you said that you'll talk to me later about that and that it might be possible.
Exactly, and we'll bring those people that you want to introduce and include. We'll get those included. Okay, so we can do that. Thank you. And of course, if there are any other leads that feel that they have key people that they want to invite, then just send along the information. Okay. But let's just finish on our very last one, which is last but not least, is omics, eDNA. Neil, are you available?
Yep, I'm here.
Thanks. Off you go.
Okay, I can share my screen, or it's in the folder. So
Ben, are you doing it?
Do it for you if you like.
I can share my screen. Sorry, I didn't know you could.
Sure.
Yeah.
You got it?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, good. Right, thanks. Yeah, so we're talking about omics eDNA working group. So we're talking there about biodiversity observation at the molecular scale. And first up, really sort of what is omics and eDNA and why do it? So just a brief summary of that. Genetic variation is, of course, the fundamental layer of biodiversity. And DNA is the universal code or standard underpinning all life. So we're working on a fairly standardized system for biodiversity already. Genomics and environmental DNA offer new indicators of ecosystem health that can help augment existing systems. And we think that omic data can improve insight into current ecosystem status and also provide potential early warning systems of threats like invasives or pathogens. And models driven in part by omic data can help provide decision makers with the foresight they need to manage for ecosystems for resilience. And this is all really a very timely because the feasibility and cost efficiency of developing omic time series are rapidly improving. So this is a real opportunity. It's a technology that's evolving very fast, and that creates a number of challenges. And so we're addressing these in 4 different topics, and we'll have 3 sessions in different time zones each day on these 4 topics. This addresses the value chain really of omics and eDNA. So sampling. So we have to sample, we have to collect in situ. You can't read DNA from satellites. That creates some challenges. Then handling and storage of those material samples as they move from field to lab, the processing of those samples, which includes their digitization, and then archiving both of the data and physical archiving of the specimens, which then provide a base that could be used in the future for future omic analyses. And that's going to be really important as we look back to see what happened over time and can access and extract further information from these material samples. And then the next group is bioinformatics and analysis. There's a lot of variation and issues around quality, curation and taxonomy, reference databases, and modeling that's used to process these data. Data and information stewardship, and there we've got a close link with the data working group. The data lifecycle, metadata, data standards, data principles are really important. And finally, society, how does these new, sometimes new data types, new capacity interface with policy? Also ethical, legal, and social issues are really key relations, for example, to the Convention for Biological Diversity. And then we've got a link to the ethics working group, and tying all that together is the need for education and training at all levels. So what we hope to achieve this week and to move forward on is developing transparency and convergence of methods globally where applicable. And again, the fast developing field is not always applicable to standardize too quickly, but we need to provide visibility again globally for standards, tools, and protocols as they emerge, and then a mechanism for comparing and surfacing best practices again globally. So that's something we really hope to be able to develop with the support of OBPS. Promote principles to exchange and compare data then, and there is highlight here fair and care principles, which if you're not aware of them, we want to really promote those. Enable more global analysis, incorporating multiple regional data sets, including omic data, and really moving towards a pathway where how can we operationalize genomic biodiversity observations at scale, and how can we do so in all regions, from local to global communities. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. That was really excellent. Funnily enough, somebody earlier on said, "And what is omics?" to me. So that was an excellent one, first slide to have. I want to say thank you to all the working group participants. You've obviously worked very intensively during that breakout hour, and those presentations are excellent. I saw there was a question in the chat about where they are going to be made available, and we will certainly make all of those that are have been produced, we will make them very obviously available somewhere and let you all know, as long as all of the work group leads are happy for us to do that. And I am assuming that you are, but if you're not, please just send an email and we will suppress actually exposing those, but we will make them all available at a higher level in one place. So that will be excellent. I'm going now to hand over to Emma, who is going to moderate the working group panel leads discussion. Emma, over to you.
Maybe just 1 second, if I could jump in with a tech note before we do that, because this is a panel type format. Our request is that if you're not a panel member, not one of the presenters that we just heard, or someone else who's going to be presenting, representing your working group to turn off your video. And then if you go to anyone whose video is off and click on them, you'll hover over them, you'll see 3 little dots in the upper right, and a menu pops up when you click on that, and at the bottom it says hide non-video participants. So if you go ahead and do that, then you'll essentially only see the panel, and that will give you a much better view. Emma, over to you.
Great, Ben, thank you very much. Okay, so this is now going to be, to wrap up this first plenary, a panel session with all of the working groups. So it's really your chance to ask questions across the working groups and perhaps, talk about some links and things like that. I would ask you perhaps to type your questions into the chat, and then I can pick them up. I'll monitor the chat at the same time as talking with the panel members, so that would be great. And we had a question earlier that I think I'd like to go back to, and this was around sort of Indigenous peoples and inclusion, because I could see in many of the different working groups, there would be echoes of this, even perhaps in the last sort of omics working group, when you start to talk about fair data, and I know, from the earlier presentations, there are perhaps different views about what fair data is. So perhaps a quick question to the panel members is this something that you think will come up in your working groups as you move through the various issues that you want to cover, the sort of the inclusion for less developing countries and sort of Indigenous peoples? And I don't mind asking working group, I wondered about for fisheries and even for omics, so perhaps you guys would like to respond, and anybody else jump in from the panel.
I can jump in from omics real quick. Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm representing omics on this panel. And we're going to actually have our last day on kind of society and ethical principles associated with omics data, from collection of samples and ownership of samples to kind of sharing of data. And also, I think an important consideration that we've already begun discussing is best practices for depending on different situations. So say someone might be in the field and not have access to different preservation techniques or different methods, or maybe your lab group doesn't have access to some of the methods that are considered current best standards. And so it might be, it'll kind of, we're trying to have a discussion too about, I guess which methods may be best in different situations.
So I think that's really terrific to hear. And I just wonder, whether sort of at the end of that session, it would be useful to send some information to the ethics team that are kind of dealing with that, and maybe if there were similar sort of discussions going across the various panels, that might be useful for the ethics team to hear from the different groups if those things come up. But I don't, fisheries, do you think this will be a sort of a topic that you will wind up covering as well, the fisheries working group? It was Emma,
if I could, would you mind if I jump in just there?
Yeah, do.
I'm sorry, but we actually did talk about this a little bit, because we have a joint session with Omics, Data and Ethics at the end of the week around the Nagoya Protocol of sharing bioresources and genetic resources, because that's extending to data, or there are deliberations about how this extends to data for nations to protect their rights over their natural heritage, even at the data level. Because we are in the age of synthetic biology, where people can actually synthesize the genetic code of organisms to produce biotechnological products. So it's getting very complicated. And so we're really looking forward to that session to explore these and also the methodologies around these. It's a very complex issue. But one thing that we're really lacking are more voices from people in these typically underrepresented communities. We've reached out to some, but we need help. We need help to connect with these communities and approach them in, let's say, appropriate ways that we're not even familiar how to do. Like from the data side, I have to, very, very candidly, I would very much like to integrate Indigenous knowledge into the knowledge representation technologies that I do. But at the same time, I'm very aware of these things like digital or data colonialization. I don't want to simply do that without due respect to the rights of these peoples. But I don't have those expertise in how to manage that. And I look towards our ethics colleagues and others to help me navigate this space, and certainly to the communities themselves. So that's a great challenge for us in the next 2 to 3 years. Thank you.
Great.
If I may jump in, René, for the Marine Leader and Plastics Working Group, I would like to talk about another angle about the question you asked about indigenous, because for the Marine Leader, marine debris, marine plastics, and so on, there are so many non-governmental organizations doing the beach cleaning, the sea cleaning. We have a group, and they will have a session next week. The group is, or the NGO is Sea Cleaners, the name, and that's under the umbrella of what we call citizen science. So citizen science is a kind of way of saying that indigenous is widely distributed all over the world. And we had during our session, breakout session, a good presentation by one of our early career person, Florence Peter. And so he presented what they do in Tanzania, where they collect so many plastics on the beach and develop this kind of the way to recycle, the way to exchange things, and etc. And that's I think a very large community, and sometimes connected from one country to another, about how to not only clean the beaches, but how to categorize, how to say, okay, I've collected whatever usually a plastic bottle, whatever is coming down from a boat or a ship doing the around the world, and so it's not indigenous in the sense of like how do they do in the northern Arctic, but it's how do we do that all over the world.
So I think it's really positive to hear from the different groups that are going to be exploring best practices, that this is in the baseline of the thinking about best practices, and a realization that in order to scale some of this observing to a global level, this has to be a part of that, which is very much part of what the first session touched upon this morning. So I think that's super interesting. Perhaps another cross topic that I kind of picked up, or I wondered about, is that Working Group 1, which I joined in the breakout session, is going to look at convergence of methods. And of course, we have a great many groups. We have, uncertainty quantification, fisheries, sargassum, marine litter, surface radiation, and omics, all working indeed on convergence in some way or other. So I wonder perhaps the challenges to Work Group 1, but also to these other work groups, to perhaps say how you might be able to contribute to the discussion from how you're working within your different groups there. I don't know if anybody would like to jump up with an idea or address that.
Like from what we've experienced already in our Slack space, if you're using Slack, you can always talk to us about maybe co-organizing, or not even co-organizing. So for example, with the Omics group, they had a set of sessions on data management, and we certainly don't want to interrupt their flow, but at the same time, a lot of our people could very much contribute to that conversation. So I cross-advertise on our channel. So whatever channel of communication you're using for this workshop, do contact the leads. If you think that maybe we could do with some ethics perspectives or data perspectives, let us know, and we'll direct some of our attention there, or our people. I'm sure that we have so many people that have mixed interests and interdisciplinary knowledge. Let us know, and we'll advertise. We'll let our people know about these challenges. And I'm sure that it will help us also understand our own single channel challenges. Because as I said in my short intervention there, we don't know the scale of the problems we're going to face in the next 10 years or even the next 5 years. So the more scanning we get of the landscape from different perspectives, the better for us, so that things don't catch us unawares. So please contact us, contact the leads, co-leads, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, so I think that's a really good suggestion, and perhaps I don't know that maybe sort of we can find the leads undoubtedly have access to information about where all the other co-leads are. So I think that's probably just one of the best ways. But I can see many opportunities, and I know some people have arranged these special groups. I also see in the chat that another suggestion is that maybe one of the open cafe sessions could be used perhaps towards the end of the week to sort of bring some groups together and things like that. So that's another sort of possibility there. So to come back, there are a few questions coming up, and one of the questions, and perhaps these are to some of the communities that have come forward to the Ocean Best Practice working groups here, some of the new communities. And the question is, how do you feel your communities are engaging with the Ocean Best Practice system? Are they engaging with it just as a sort of one point and then sort of coming out of the wedge, or are people coming towards you and saying, you know, is this a part of the Ocean Best Practice system? So this is perhaps a question to some of the new groups who are joining, looking at creating best practices here.
This is Emily. I'll jump in on that. For Sargassum, there have been specific requests on compiling and sharing best practices. And so we had already started working with the Ocean Best Practices system before this workshop, but primarily for compiling information related to management. So we're hoping that with this workshop, we can get people to share information about monitoring, forecasting, and other areas of Sargassum research.
Okay, and would you have any suggestions for improvements about sort of letting people know that Ocean Best Practices system is here and here to support people in one way or another in the development of best practices?
So I'll say one thing that we've done for Sargassum is we put together a centralized website for Sargassum information. And so we've actually embedded a search for Sargassum management from the Ocean Best Practices page, and then ask people to register their practices in addition to finding ones that they're interested in. And so we're hoping to make those types of connections, and we've been looking at other ways to pull in that information. So talking with Ocean Expert, for example, about creating a Sargassum subgroup where you could have experts who are working on specific areas of Sargassum monitoring, forecasting, and management, and then can share that information specifically on Sargassum by pulling the data and using an API. So those are some things that we're looking at doing.
Okay, well that sounds, I mean, that's a really practical solution, and it's kind of gives visibility, but also gets people thinking in that line and the ability to access best practices at the same time with some of those links. Does anybody else have any sort of thoughts in that area? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's René again. It's definitely a line of thought that we have. I mean, we are working in this large community about marine debris, and especially with Emily, by the way, and trying to build what we call a platform, and supervised by United Nations, UNEP. And so building that means also that on the one hand are inputs which are linked to technology, observation, and so on, but as well linked to the way that what we call citizen science is an input as well, and how they describe and in terms of a data, what the best practice is, and at the same time, on the output side, what the goal of doing that, and who is really addressed, what is really addressed. We know the problem, but there are different, it's as all the problems, and there is no adequate solutions, but still is a possibility to include this kind of consideration about what's the best practice when I observe something to improve the observation itself. And that kind of platform, we have also, and that's another link to what Peerlogy is doing. We probably will have an artificial intelligence monitoring or managing, or whatever the good word is, the platform in order to put together all this zillion of whatever bytes, prefix you like. I mean, actually it's pentabytes for me, but which is 10 to the power of too many. And that is really a point which will be discussed next week, especially in a session dealing with citizen science in the Marine Litter group.
Yeah, and
Mark would like to
Emma,
speak. Mark
go
would
ahead.
like to speak.
I just wanted to follow up on Emily's comment. She came up with a very clever way to embed a search engine into their Sargassum site. And so in that essence, she's an ambassador to that entire community. And all it takes is one to introduce a best practice system to a group. And that technique that Emily provided is now going to be used by USIU's glider group, which is kind of neat. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Mark, like picking up on that, and also on Renee's points, that just shows like how rapidly things can change through a very precisely directed technological intervention. I mean, what is technology? Technology is the ability to do work faster. And that's what's changing our world so quickly. We can, once you found the right target, all of a sudden everything changes. And I think our chance in the next week is to figure out, where are these pressure points? Where are these points that we can push a little bit to affect a large change in what needs to be done? And as you said, Renee, like, I guess artificial intelligence can help a lot, but we have to build it based on real intelligence. And a lot of real intelligence is not based on people who have large data stores. It's people who have deep knowledge. Fisher communities on the coastline of Ireland. I was talking to some of at the All Atlantic Forum, some of the youth ambassadors. They're interviewing fishermen on the coast of Ireland who have seen the changes. They don't have data, but they have stories, right? How do we get that into the artificial intelligence solutions? How do we make this work? And these are the inspirations that we need. And I'm very, very interested in hearing those perspectives.
Okay, well, that's fabulous. I think there was there was a comment earlier on about thinking out of the box in terms of collecting data and collecting information, developing best practices and new systems for less developed countries. And so I really think that that sort of approach is important. And at the end of the day, what the Ocean Best Practices is about is certainly about communities. It's about collecting or enabling communities to work together on these best practices. And so the more ways we can kind of, find that touch point, that one touch point, and sort of a bridge into different communities, that I guess the more we can spread and work with more people. There's an interesting question, I think, come up. I might have to scroll back to grab it. And perhaps it's a more general question. And it was really around, how do we engage public interest? And, this perhaps has an aspect of interest for funders and longevity of the Ocean Best Practice system. But I think they're talking more broadly about how do, it came up in the session earlier this morning, we haven't got a sort of a best practice on communications in ocean science session this time, but perhaps, we might need one for next time. And I don't know if anybody has some thoughts along those lines. It's one of the questions. How do we better engage with the public, maybe even over best practices? Maybe the ethics group has some kind of idea in that direction.
Yes, I don't really have the answer, but it's something that we will raise during one of our sessions in engaging the society, and I think when we are talking about fishermen, it's important, and we will have a session, 2 sessions discussing about this, on engaging with fishermen. It's really important. How can we do this the best? How can we establish trust? And just one point I would like to raise about ethics and best practices. In ethics, we can give recommendation and give big lines. But in fact, in ethics, it's always a case-by-case studies. When you have big ethical issues, you always need a kind of ethical committee. It's important to have this at the institutional level in order to have different expertise, to have different point of view in order to help a scientist to face an issue. But of course, it's a matter of multidisciplinarity and multiple expertise, different cultures, and to solve different issues. But it's we will be talking about the engagement of with the society during one of our sessions. So,
and I think like the point you just.
Sorry, I was
no,
because I was reading back Regina's question, and the question includes, in a sense, the answer. One of the possible answer is that when you go to a museum, you see descriptions which are written in everyone and everybody language and not the scientific language, and that's an effort. I've been part of in my city here in Brest, where the city has developed, is in a way of developing an ocean museum, and at every stage, and including the technology. So how to explain in simple words, I mean, how a satellite can see, quote, a fish. Of course, the satellite doesn't see the fish, but the satellite see something, an action, or a second set of information that means that there is fish there, or birds, or whatever, or mosquitoes. Because if you look at the places where along the coast of Brazil, where the people are moving, they're moving because they are going away from mosquitoes. So in a sense, from a satellite, you see a mosquito. So that's the way of explaining that, and with displays and figure and like in the Smithsonian, where I've been, this sphere where you see stuff around. I mean, it's a way to introduce some kind of knowledge at a level which is interesting for us as well as for everyone. We don't want to put an equation there.
Sorry. It might be relevant in the end for some of the best practices that we're talking about. Yeah, it's some visibility of that, because we perhaps traditionally thought of a best practice around a sensor or something like that. But as we move into marine litter and other areas, the ability to engage community and communicate will be a part of that best practice in order to take the observations, and perhaps more so in the bioeco environment as well, and more coastally orientated observations, I'm sort of beginning to feel. So I'd like to hear from some of the people who haven't spoken yet in the panel.
Shut up.
No, well, that's not what I meant at all. But, no, and perhaps I could sort of see the question, which I think is interesting, because we talked a little bit about thinking ahead and thinking perhaps a few years out, and certainly best practices don't always take 1 week to produce. So we must be realistic. But if we were going to look perhaps in 2 years' time, or let's say 2 years' time, at another ocean best practice sort of working group sessions, what would you like to have the headline for what your working group has achieved in the next 2 years? We laid the foundation for the marine debris system? What's the sort of the ambition of the working group? And I think I'd like to hear from all the working groups on that, but I might pick upon people who haven't spoken. I'm sorry, it's a bit mean to do that, but I think it's important to hear from everybody. So, for example, Andrea, you haven't jumped into the conversation. So what would you like, what would be your newspaper headline of your working group for 2 years
Well,
out?
again, I think that this idea of a collaborative organization model is something that is relatively simple and straightforward and could be quite readily adopted broadly by the community as a baseline for starting a place to start and developing partnerships across, diverse groups trying to come forward to achieve a common impact. And so I think, yeah, in 2 years, I think that it would be reasonable to see that there would be case studies and examples of how you'd either gone, we spoke today, IMOS could write a case study today, right, of how that worked. And, so just, maybe a series of case studies that said, yes, this is a baseline of functionality. Doesn't necessarily take a lot of resources. It just takes concerted effort and concerted thought, and probably someone minding the store to make sure that all of the plates continue to spin as the project proceeds. So
okay.
I think we could be very successful in 2 years. Yeah.
So to plant the seed and see if, some successful case studies sort of propagate from that. So that's great. If I might ask Katie, for what would be your kind of 2 years out aspirations for the group?
Sure. I would be very excited for increased transparency and sharing of protocols. I feel like a lot of times in our community, things are moving so fast. We're trying to develop protocols, kind of our own lab groups, and a way to kind of share the work that we're doing and move towards, making converging methods where applicable would be, I think, really wonderful and help us get to a place where we could start exchanging data between different research groups and thinking about problems that require data from multiple different regions, which right now is really hampered by kind of lack of understanding really at how our different methods may be affecting our different data streams.
Okay, great. I might ask the same of Frederick, if you're here, from the fisheries side of things.
You mean me?
Yes.
I was on the ethics group, not the fisheries.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I think you want to tag somebody from the fisheries group if you want to.
No, I will. I'll take somebody from the ethics group as well.
Well, Michelle's already spoken, but in terms of myself, I think probably one of the greatest challenges and benefits we're going to face is by bringing these indigenous knowledge streams into the mainstream. At this point in time, it's going to really change perspectives. It also is fundamentally going to change the way we view the world, because for the indigenous peoples, the relationship with the environment is exactly that. It's a relationship. It's not a correlation. These aren't data points. It's about how they interact and live with these animals. And it ties in any data point that we collect as part of a relationship that they have with the environment. And it really does change your perspective when you begin to work with them and increase your respect for the environment. That's me.
Great. I think that's, I hope that that comes to pass. I think it would ease a great many issues. Arta, perhaps I can ask you.
Hi, Emma. So I think I'm probably might repeat something that already Renee would say, but in terms of a newspaper headline for what I would like to see come out of the working group on marine litter is that we really progress from best practices and guidelines towards first standard sampling protocols for the most mature elements of the marine debris observing system. That will be one thing. And the second thing is that we really integrate all the efforts on the regional and global scale that talk about developing an integrated observing system for marine litter on the one hand, and an integrated platform for data management and generating and sharing information. So if we can make progress in that direction by bringing key actors together through this, I would consider that a success. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Arta. So it would be interesting to hear from if Neil Davies is still here from the Fisheries Group, where you would see sort of the outcome in or the headline in 2 years' time, where you'd like to be.
Neil was with the Omics Group, but he couldn't make it here for this panel.
Right. Okay. I'm getting confused as to who's where. It's obviously getting, you know why? It's close to midnight here, so
yeah.
Christian is from the group.
Cisco Werner is the probably if Peter Hogan is not available because he had some problems with the connection, Cisco Werner should be able to take the lead on that for fisheries.
Okay.
Well, this is Peter. Can you hear me? Am I still on?
Sure.
Okay, good. No, where would we be in 2 years? Well, I think certainly, you know, having the fisheries community really active in the ocean best practices is a #1 thing, because we're not there yet. It's actually a new thing, and it's a big community, and it's a broad topics going all the way from the sort of like many of you are coming from the ocean data collection, but we're going all the way through from assessments to management and advice, and this is a very, very broad topics. And I also listened to your discussion on indigenous data. I think that's you know, fisheries is the activity which includes most people of the ocean economy sectors around the world, and small scale fisheries, and definitely so. It's a cultural thing in every coastal state. And we have specific issues with access to data. I mean, we talk about principles like FAIR and so on, and they don't really apply to indigenous data. We have other codes beginning to emerge, and they will be very different. So how to include that, I think, is a major challenge, and it doesn't go by itself. Yeah, we have a lot to do in fisheries, and we're just starting. I mean, remember, this is the first time we really tried to do this in a systematic way, and it's a very, very broad topic.
So I think that's some really interesting perspectives, and so it sounds as if some of the dialogues that are initiating here under the best practices will perhaps help in that sense. So let's see if I can get the groups right this time. So we haven't heard from Joanna for the working group 2 in terms of training and where you think you'd like to be in a couple of years' time.
Well, yeah, sorry, I have to turn off my video because the people are already awake from my side of the planet and the internet is getting slower now. So, but I think that for the training and the capacity development, it might be quite ambitious, but what's going to be helpful in the next few years is to really like understand or if we can map the different types of capacity development against different criteria, or the funding, the platform, the EOBs, the age and career stage, according to those variables. And because if there is a matrix where people can see and they can figure out the most effective methods for them, that would be, I think, very useful. And also you can hear the roosters crowing now. It's the start of my day. I know you're ending up the day with this. The start of my day, so they're waking up the neighborhood. But anyway, so yeah, and there was a question earlier about whether the session would be touching on the possible partnership or potential partnerships among organizations who already have existing initiatives related to ocean best practices. And I think that that is very important because That is how you can increase the interactions and the collaborations between these organizations and communities, and hopefully there is where the synergies can start, and then we can capitalize on the existing efforts of various communities on the ground. So those are really like big ambitions, I think, because it might take time to be able to really gain an understanding of what do we actually really know about the current situation, and as we scan it, we would have a more, I would say, more truthful understanding of how we can better promote the wide use of OBPS, and people will benefit from it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joanna. It's great to hear the cockerels crowing. It's kind of, I feel if I stay out much longer, I'll hear them as well. And so I have two questions now coming up for the working group 1 for Johannes and Juliet. First of all, is kind of where would you see yourself, the work that you're doing now in the work group sort of in 2 years' time? And then also we have something from Frank talking about the essential ocean variables, and really saying that we haven't heard so much about the essential ocean variable construct today, but this also can play an important part in perhaps stimulating convergence. So I don't know whether you would like to speak to that as well.
I think that Arthur, okay, go ahead. No, that's part of what Arthur is doing, so.
Indeed, yes.
Go ahead.
Juliet.
Well, I can make just a short comment on this. No, sorry, go ahead. I'll go later.
Arthur. No, Juliet.
No. So I'll say, yeah, it's also midnight here. I'll say the first part, and Johannes can do the second. I would say in 2 years' time, what would be really great for the convergence and endorsement is that there'll be perhaps thousands more best practices on the repository, but maybe 20 or 30% of them will have been converged. And so they'll still be there in the old format, but the new format will be there, and these converged best practices will have been endorsed. So there'll be thousands of best practices on the repository, but maybe 20 to 30% of them will have been converged together, and they'll have endorsement from having a really fantastic community review process, and then endorsed by, say, Goose or other communities. But they will have importantly been through that community review process to get that endorsement. And then Johannes, you can answer the second one.
I can first confirm what you said.
That's a relief. That's a relief.
Yeah, and really, yeah. I guess are the EOVs and the concepts around EOVs helpful in terms of the convergence? Or?
Well, yeah. I think the concept EOV, it might be called differently in different communities. It could be also MSFD targets, which is the same than an EOV, but for a different community, are a very, very good concept to motivate convergence. And as Juliet said, what would be also important in that context is to have means to bring the communities together and to initiate the process. So I hope that there will be funding opportunities actually that will unlock this potential out there, but that's currently really often hard to overcome, to bring the people together and then to create these tailored for EUVs or for other kind of EUVs tasks or variables. So yeah, these two things, I think the funding is another thing that should be really solved. maybe with digital meetings, we will not fade that. But we need other incentives, I think, in order to bring people together and then to work on this. Like this one here.
Okay, well, that my follow-on question is what are these incentives? What do they look like? I mean, I think that's a good, it's a good question.
Oh yes, I hope we will find that a little bit out also in our working group.
Yeah.
So what other communities do in order to come up with these incentives, and what are the bottlenecks and problems, what there might be only little things that really are showstoppers to progress fast and to really and also on a wider range of things. Now they are very limited individual activities only, but we would like to see that, of course, as Juliet said, across a wide range of applications and communities.
Okay, great. So I think I've got like just two groups that I haven't asked this question to. So I'm going to ask Pierluigi or from the data side of things. What you've talked a couple of times about sort of thinking far out there. Where would you see things in sort of in the sort of the Ocean Best Practice System workshop in 2 years' time for data?
I mean, so, you know, 2 years' time, what is that? That's already 1/5 through the ocean decade. That's 1/5 through potentially the world's attention on the oceans, and who knows what's next. And then hearing the rooster crowing on the other side of the planet through the technology and digital media we have right now. You know, we're a planetary community, and data and information is how we connect. Right now, data and information are streaming towards us, not just bits and bytes, but facial expressions, body language, everything, you know? And so that's what I want to see in 2 years' time, that our methods alignments, the convergence of methods, the convergence of different things that people care about, fisheries, feeding people, sargassum, ecological crises, data and information are helping those things come together in a planetary, not just information basis, but consciousness, planetary consciousness. We're a rock in space, you know, come on people. We're a rock in space flying through space, and, you know, we have limited life support systems on this planet. And it's hard because we only live a short time. Our consciousness is based on generations. The same conspiracy theories come up every 30 years or so when people forget. And data and information is the way that we transcend that and actually start behaving like a species. So Emma, sorry, you wanted me to go out there, so I'm going out there, right?
Yeah,
yeah. But I think that's the same spirit. We have to manage this planet, right? And if we want to manage this planet, we need things like the essential ocean variables, the essential biodiversity variables, the essential climate variables. We need things that are diagnostics about spaceship Earth, right? So that's what I want to see. I want to see a little bit more sci-fi in the way that humans think about it. It's like the space race. We need the inspiration once again. And I think bringing together all of the fascinating facts that each one of our working groups has about their domain through clear communication, connecting with people who have different ways of knowing, is an instrument to that, to connect science and education to culture.
Indeed, I would say that, you know, part of perhaps managing with the limited resources will mean reaching some sorts of agreement, and that best practices, they're not the only way of reaching agreement, but they are also about reaching agreement in one way or another, and perhaps can play a role in that, especially as, you know, we move and look at best practices in different areas. I have a feeling that I haven't asked Emily this question, so I'm going to turn to Emily.
Thank you, Emma. For sargassum, we have a few deliverables that we would like to produce. One is to work with all of the various best practices that are being produced for management in certain regions, and to produce an overall management guide that would be translated into several languages that could be useful for people on the ground, as well as to create a lot of connections across the Atlantic for people who are working all the way from Africa to the Caribbean on similar issues, and really could benefit from collaborating. So that's another big push of ours.
Great, So that's really, really practical, and it's a slight change from Pierluigi's view, but equally well, it is talking about connecting people in the planet together and coming to agreement on tackling issues. So I think the only person I might not have asked is in fact Mark. Are you there, Mark Bush?
I am, yeah. And when Julie had said thousands would have converged, I thought to myself, I come from a arena where things take decades to happen, and it seemed really, really optimistic to me. But with ocean uncertainty quantification, I think we're in a unique position. Again, we share the same space that the ocean best practice system shares in terms of value chain and full breadth of variables. And it's ocean UQ is so unsung that the best way to converge is start with one and agree on it. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for that in ocean uncertainty quantification. So hopefully in 2 years' time, there might be one or two. Would be I'd be satisfied with that.
Excellent. Right, that's really good. So I'm going to draw this to a close because we're coming to the end of
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, this is Megan Cronin, and can I just?
I'm past midnight, so you're quite right to interrupt me.
Sorry,
Megan.
Yeah, just very quickly. In 2 years' time, right now there's only 20 stations within the Global Ocean Observing System that monitor surface radiation, and I hope that in 2 years' time there's many, many, many more, and that we have a major expansion. I mean, we already know that within, because of the Tropical Pacific Observing System 2020 project, the 4 sites are going to expand to 57 sites. And, with the, these new technologies like the unmanned surface vehicles that are becoming much more, prevalent in our observing system, it is potential that there could be, an order of magnitude more sensors, surface radiation observations within the Global Ocean Observing System in 2 years from now. And I would hope that those measurements are high quality and have understood best practices that are accepted by the community, and that this network of surface stations extends the land-based reference network to be global. Thanks.
Great. And with that level of expansion in place and different platforms, best practices are going to be important to getting the data out.
Absolutely.
There. So really great. So there's some interesting side discussion going on, and Jay might like to pick up on that as I'm going to hand over to him in a couple of minutes. I think partly just thinking of, as reaching out to communities that sort of take on the ideas of best practices, that there could be some sort of almost an endorsement of communities in their approach to best practices in some way. It's an interesting thought, because I think what I take out of this session, not just that people have great ambition and vision for the future about where they want to go, but a real recognition of cross-cutting themes around convergence, a lot of people mentioning that, around the connection to indigenous or local communities in one way or another, and how better that could be done, how we can also look to reach out to communities and kind of spearhead more into communities, and sort of, how we can possibly sort of engage better in those communities that we've begun to touch. We have 11 working groups, I think, and a whole week of some really interesting discussions to get down to. I hope you do manage to connect a little bit across the working groups, because I think there's a lot of interesting knowledge that's going to be developed in each of them, which you know might well benefit a little bit of sharing between the working groups. And I really look forward to coming back in a week's time and staying up till midnight again, or whatever, to hear the results and to hear sort of how the week has progressed to move you forward along your pathways and the ideas and the concrete plans and next steps that come out of that, because I think it's going to be a really exciting week, and a lot's going to happen in each of these groups, and we're going to sort of come out at the end of this with some really exciting initiatives. So without more ado, I'm going to hand back to Jay, who I think is going to talk a little bit around the week and how that's going to be organized and managed. So back to you, Jay. And thank you to all the participants in our panels. And I wish that you could put sort of some clap signs or something in the chat. But so here's my clap to all of the participants in from the various different time zones. Oh, Juliet's worked out how to do it. She's much more tech savvy than me. Okay.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you to all of the panel. This is it's been a very, very good discussion. I have now found that Pauline can use a cock crowing as her alarm for 3 minutes, and that will stop the discussion. So we have a new innovation here. I would like to summarize just very quickly some of the high-level points that we have. And Emma, you did a good job at a very high level of saying there's an importance of communication, community, and particularly reaching across working groups. And I heard things like ethics permeating things, training permeating things. We should look next week at the opportunities not only to make recommendations from our groups, but across groups. There's a question that we had on how are each of the communities addressing convergence. Convergence is very, very important because many times we're asked by people who are using our repository, I just have 10 practices in front of me, which do I choose? The ability of each of you to make recommendations becomes significant in the growth of best practices and practices across our communities. Next week, we have a full schedule, but we've been asked in the chat, hey, there's a lot of interesting ideas, some things that are new, the certification and other things. There is room in the schedule, and you all can open or can add in the open space area subjects that you'd like to talk about. And so let me encourage that we look for additional key areas that would move us forward, put them either into the cafe or into the open space, and take advantage of the times that we're together. One area that was asked was, how about a working group on communicating science? This is a good example of, if you're interested, put it into the open space and let's talk about it. Another thing is the more formal long-term linking of communities. We hope that you'll, after this week and are not totally exhausted, are able as teams to continue moving forward. We'd like to know how we can support that, whether it's the continuation of Zoom access or other means. And so maybe a good example is the linking of the websites that Emily has done. Maybe we can each teach each other a little bit. I really don't want to take too much more of the time right now, but to thank everybody for their presentations, their work, and offer as much support as we and the Ocean Best Practices team can give you in making the next week successful. Thank you, have a good weekend, and we look forward to next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
We do a group photo first, a quick group screenshot. Everyone turn their video on.
Good idea.
Gallery view, people can wave. We'll stop the recording though.
We are already tomorrow.
Good. And this should be